Sure.
Guess I can ask you the question.
Yeah.
So, let me see. Your grandfather. So that's who? Grandma Anderson's parents?
Wait a minute now.
No, that's Fribley.
Yeah.
Your father's father.
My father's father was Edward Anderson. And he, according to report, the information that I have, which is not a lot, he came to the United States when he was very young. Most estimates are about eight years old. And he was to have his mother come and take care of him the next year. So he came on a ship.
From Norway.
From Norway. And he stayed in Bridgeport, Connecticut, I think, for the first year. And his mother never came. So he sort of made his way with people in a Scandinavian community.
But not family members?
But not necessarily family members. At least I have no knowledge of them.
Wow.
Yeah. So then when he was 18, he had moved to, or he was then moving to Brooklyn. So he moved to Brooklyn. He was at Brooklyn anyway, and he took a job working for a telephone company. And they sent him to the remote regions of Long Island to work for the telephone company. And pretty soon along in that range, he married my grandmother Anderson, and her name was Emma. What was her name? Emma Titus. That's right.
Oh, that's where you get the Titus from in your name?
That's where the Titus comes from.
I never knew that. And you, how much education did he have? Or not?
He had not quite an 8th grade education.
In Norway.
He was not really literate. And when he worked for the telephone company and he had to sign some paperwork, he always had his wife, Emma, sign it. And so he worked for the telephone company for his whole career. He died when he was like 65 or something like that. And he died when I was working in Greenland.
Oh, so you met him.
I met him, right.
Well, maybe, did you see him often? Because you were on Long Island, too.
Yeah, but the trip from sort of Brooklyn to Garden City or something in there was a whole day's trip.
What?
It was. Didn't they have a train?
Because it was like, it was a year of 1940, something like that.
During the war?
During the war.
But Fred, didn't he, he worked for the phone company, didn't he become pretty wealthy?
Well, I don't know how you would characterize it. He had a job working for a telephone company. I think he attained the rank of supervisor or something like that, foreman.
Oh.
So
Wasn't
he was in charge of the crews that went out and fixed the telephone line when the tree had broken down and taken the telephone line with it. And so he was the foreman in charge of a group of like 3 guys or something like that to do the electrical work, the telephone work.
And he never learned to write or read?
He could read a little bit, but he could not write.
Never in his whole life.
That's my understanding. In any case, if he was able to write, it was very meager, and he preferred not to do it.
Oh. Well, yeah, and tell the story about how his wife died and he remarried and his new wife took all of his money. Wasn't that the story?
Yeah, basically there's some story like that. But it's not that she took a lot of money, because she didn't have a lot of money. He was not a person who accumulated a fortune or anything like that. He made a good enough wage to have a company paid retirement and so on. But I never heard a story indicating that he was wealthy.
Well, how does first wife die?
She had a kind of diabetes, and she had some funny things about her. She would have a sudden faint. And, and then I guess she needed orange juice or something, you know.
Oh, it sounds like diabetes.
Yeah. And let's see, what was the other one? Oh yeah, she belched very vociferously. she would look at the rest of the people at the table after she had a good belch. She says, "Well, I can't help it. It just happens." But she was a member of the Long Island aristocracy.
Oh, that's where I get the wealth.
It was her money.
She was disowned.
Oh, because she married him?
Because she married my grandfather. Yeah.
This guy from Norway who couldn't write.
Right. She wanted to have babies, so she had 6.
Oh, she did? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so there was.
So there was your father and 5, or your grandfather, your father and 5 others.
William was the oldest one, and next was my father, and then was Steve, and then Ruth, and George,
And Mary.
and Mary.
Who was the youngest?
Mary.
I remember George. I met him once.
Yeah, you met him.
He came out to Bourbon once.
Oh, yeah, probably did.
He was probably very bent over at that point, because he developed some osteoporosis or something like that later in his.
I don't remember that. I remember him being kind of larger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember him telling, you know, he was just out there like in the backyard at Grandma's, and Grandma was saying something to him, and he wasn't he wasn't really that impressed with what she was saying, and he said something like, "Oh, relax over there, would you, Almeida?"
He was always funny, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he had a good sense of humor.
Yeah, it was
Clever.
Yeah. Yeah. George and my father were the family wits. William was always pretty serious spoken.
Yeah.
Steve didn't really have a lot of discussion with him. He ran a store in Port Jefferson, and if anybody in that group became fairly wealthy, it would have been Steve, I thought.
Oh, really?
Well, I think I remember Grandma talking somehow about Steve, or was that maybe a different Steve?
Well, could have been his
When did he
son.
die?
His son.
Oh,
Yeah.
Both Steve and George were at our wedding, right, Fred? Steve and George.
Maybe so. Don't remember that.
Your dad was already dead,
Yeah.
but two of them came out to our wedding. But Steve had a son named Steve B. Steve, I call him
Yeah.
Stevie. So she might have been referring to him.
well, that's quite a story because that's definitely, that's what the kids are. That's what they read about in history is how these people came over on boats.
Yeah, all by themselves.
Yeah, and stuff.
Made it in their new world.
In Quincy, they went to that Swedish American
Yeah.
museum up there, Andersonville.
Right.
And I guess they talk to the kids about how they came over on boats, and they have like a boat,
Oh,
and they
yeah.
it's one of those things where they kind of, go through it a little bit with the kids, almost like they're
Well,
coming over or whatever.
Oh, and it wasn't the people who were speaking, it was their grandparents or somebody like that, you think?
Oh yeah, it's just I don't know, it's like employees now or
Oh,
whatever.
I see. Oh. But Fred, I don't see I can't remember seeing a picture of your grandmother, Anderson, or your grandfather. It's like, well, I don't have a view of what they look like. I never met them.
I had some portrait pictures. They may still be in the closet.
From your mother?
Yeah. I can remember a picture of my grandfather. I can remember seeing my grandmother, my grandfather's wife.
But when you were on Long Island, it's not like, okay, even if it was far, you'd get together at Christmas or something?
Yeah. Usually we would get together at Christmas and maybe Thanksgiving as well. But it was such an organizational challenge to get everything together.
But Fred, your grandparents, Anderson, had the cottage on Long Island.
Right.
And so that's where you all got together a lot in the summertime.
Right, in the summertime we were there.
Where was that? Let me guess, Fire Island.
No,
Stony Brook.
Stony Brook, yeah. It was
Stony
on the
Brook.
north side of the Long Island.
Yeah.
But didn't they have a house out there? Why are you talking about living in Brooklyn or something? Didn't they live out there? And you said your grandmother
Well-
had all those roses around?
The cottage on West Meadow Beach, where we had our summertime get-together on the 4th of July for the main event. Most years we had a gathering there. What was I saying about that?
I was asking you, well, did they live out there? Or was
All
that
right,
just
they
a cottage?
we lived at West Meadow Beach at the cottage for less than a year. But it was about a year, maybe 8-9 months, until it got too cold. The place was not heated, except by a kerosene heater.
But we're not talking about you and your parents. We're talking about your grandparents. Did they have a house out there? Your grandparents? No, they
No.
never did?
No, not to my knowledge.
They just had that cottage.
They had a cottage.
Oh, I see.
And they lived in Brooklyn, or
Uh,
not?
Well, let me see if I can piece some of this together now. I think my grandfather and my grandmother, Anderson, were married. I don't know if we can find a record of just exactly when they were married. but they were married, and I think either at about that time, maybe before, maybe afterwards, they moved away from Brooklyn, and then I think they were at 99 or 66 Robbins Street in Port Jefferson. And
That's what I remember. I think when you were growing up, they were mostly living there,
yes,
weren't they?
yeah. Now my father and mother had a house that they rented. You know, it's not hard to put it together. My father and my mother lived in Garden City. And also in Stony Brook. We had a rented house in Floral Park on Long Island during the war. So like in around 1944 or 43 or something. We were in Garden City, myself and my sister and my father and my mother. We were all there in that house as a rental. But then after the war, it was difficult to find housing because all the soldiers came home and took all the housing. And my father couldn't afford to buy a house from that. So they moved then to Stony Brook. And they lived in a house at the end of a lane in Stony Brook for maybe a couple years until they could buy a house. And that was the house on 51 Harvard Street in Garden City. And then they lived there throughout my high school years. And then I went away to college. And that's all that is the ancient history part.
I'm gonna have to look it up on a map. I have no idea. Where is this Port Jefferson? Is that just a?
Well, Port Jefferson is, you know, Long Island sort of sticks out like
Yeah.
a fine finger. And Port Jefferson is about a third of the way from New York City to Montauk Point, which is the end of Long Island.
And it's on the North Shore.
It's on the North Shore.
Gotcha.
But Fred, why don't you talk about when you were out there during the war and you were watching for submarines?
The guy who came to fish, so to speak. So we were living in the house. No, we were at first living in the cottage, and it was heated with this kerosene. And we noticed, because we were practically the only ones living in that part of West Meadow Beach, we noticed that there was a man that came and stood on the shore and threw the lure into the water for catching fish. And he would do this for a matter of hours, right around high tide or dusk, when it was just getting dark. And the speculation was that he was actually a spy for the U.S. forces to watch for submarines coming into Stony Brook Harbor, maybe to carry out some sort of espionage. But I don't think it was ever totally confirmed, although my father, I think, agreed with the interpretation that the guy was there for wartime service.
Because you would have been pretty young, because you're 37, born in 37, so this is like you're 7 or 8.
Yeah,
Or...
so I was a young kid.
Well, that must have been pretty exciting anyway. Or was it just scary?
Yeah,
Wartime.
He rarely caught a fish. But I don't know that he threw them back or anything, so. I don't remember that he had fancy binoculars or anything like that. He may have. That would have been a kind of a giveaway. You don't fish with binoculars.
All right, well, that's good. Thank you for talking about that.
Well, you're welcome.
And where did you say you had a town you thought he was from in Norway?
Bergen.
Bergen?
B-E-R-G-E-N.
I'll have to look that up too.
Somebody mentioned that. I did not have first-hand knowledge of that, of course.
And what was his family? I mean, that probably cost a lot of money, or no? I don't know. To come over on a boat.
Well, people were really anxious. They took their life savings and came to the New World.
And what was his? Do you know what his family did in Norway? Were they fishermen or farmers?
I remember this question coming up, and you said he was a seaman.
Oh yeah.
So he maybe had a small apartment or townhouse, a kind of a boarding house in Bergen. I don't know. That's mostly guesswork. But I remember him specifically being mentioned as a seaman. And it was sort of the end of the trail of tracing down who he was. So the people were tracing after him because he owed some responsibility to help out my grandfather, who was a pretty young kid.
Yeah.
When he was 8 years old, then that's pretty young to be managing your own affairs, but some kids did it.
And let's see. So, what year do you think he would have come over? If he was 8 years old.
Well, I don't know that I have anything to fix.
Well, you said he died when you were in Greenland.
When I was in Greenland, that would have been in 1960. When did I first go to Greenland?
Talking about when your dad died?
No, his
or sort of.
grandfather.
Oh.
So my grandfather, who died first? My grandmother or my grandfather? I can't remember. They were close together within about 2 years. And I was away for the funeral arrangements and so on, in both cases, because it occurred in the summertime. And I was either in Greenland or some other remote place. And they didn't even tell me about someone who died. For some time. And then I remember I was riding in the car with my father and mother and my sister, and I let out some blue expression of invective or bad curse words that I had learned from the U.S. Army in Greenland. So my parents were aghast at my vocabulary. So I pretty much corrected that.
Well, it sounds like it would have been, I don't know, say 1960 when he died. But he died when he was 65, I think you said.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So that would mean he was born in like 1895-ish.
Yeah,
And if he came over when he was 8, that would mean like 1903 or something he came over.
That
yeah,
probably
it's
makes sense.
pretty close. Yeah.
I don't know when he died. I mean, I didn't meet you until 1964 or something, so I never knew your grandparents, and I don't know when he died.
Yeah, that's hard to imagine, isn't it? Just
It would be
I would-
fun to go back to Port Jefferson though and look and see if that old house is still there. Do you remember that house?
The one on the beach?
No, the one in Port Jefferson.
No,
Was my
was your grandmother's house.
right.
I know you've talked about that house, but I never was there. I don't remember you showing it to me. All I remember are the roses. You loved your grandmother's roses.
Yeah. I only remember my grandmother's roses at the cottage.
Oh,
But
that where they
there
were?
might have been some
Oh,
in Port Jefferson as well.
oh, oh.
Well, we should get my sister's input on this. I think her knowledge is at least partially different than mine.
And probably a lot better.
Yeah.
well, I can't imagine putting one of my kids on a boat when they were 8.
Oh, I can't either.
Especially some boat in 1903. I mean, that had to be pretty primitive, right? Or what? Are you talking about
Well, no, you're talking about
an
Ocean
ocean
liner.
liner type of
Steamer,
thing?
yeah.
yeah. But I mean, people are still doing this, you know, they're trying to get their kids somewhere.
Yeah.
But
true.
oh, that's just heartbreaking to me.
That's weird.
Anyway, that was good, Fred. That was interesting.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, little anecdotes in there that are kind of funny.
All right, well, let's head to the museum then.